cathedral glowed in golden light, its high arches rising like the wings of angels. Crystal chandeliers cast shimmering reflections on the polished marble floor, and flower arrangements lined the aisle with cascading white orchids and roses. Every detail screamed of extravagance, the kind only a man like Ramiz Khan could afford, the CEO of a luxury fashion empire. He was known for his wealth, arrogance, and ruthless ambition. Tonight, he had chosen to put his marriage on display as another trophy, another conquest to parade before the world. The pews were filled with dignitaries, socialites, and business tycoons. Cameras clicked, phones buzzed, and whispers fluttered through the air like restless birds. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the bride, Alina Khan, the woman who had captured the attention of the untouchable CEO. Yet among the whispers, a different current stirred pity, suspicion, and curiosity. Rumors had spread for months about Ramiz's temper, his affairs, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding this sudden wedding. Alina entered the cathedral slowly, her veil draped lightly over her face, her gown modest compared to the glittering couture of the guests. She walked with a grace that belied the heaviness in her steps, not just from the weight of the embroidered dress, but from the life growing inside her. Her hand often drifted instinctively toward her small baby bump, a silent act of protection. Beneath her lowered lashes, her eyes told a story of exhaustion and quiet fear. Though she wore a smile, soft, fragile, and forced, the whispers grew louder. Isn't she pregnant already? She looks pale. Does he even care? She's not the type of woman he usually flaunts. Ramiz stood at the altar, his tailored black suit fitted like armor, his face carved in arrogance. He offered Alina a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To the world, it looked like a charming gesture. To Alina, it was a warning, a smile she had learned to fear. But there was someone else at the altar, someone whose presence shifted the atmosphere in subtle ways. The priest. Father Samuel stood tall in his white vestments, his hands resting calmly on the Bible before him. His voice carried authority, his eyes watchful and steady. Most guests saw only a priest performing his sacred duty. Ramiz saw only a man in robes, insignificant, there to bless what he believed was a formality. But Alina knew the truth. Behind the calm eyes and composed demeanor stood her elder brother, the brother who had raised her like a father after their parents died, the brother who had fought his way into the world of law and earned a reputation as one of the fiercest lawyers in the city. Samuel's gaze lingered on his sister. His heart tightened at the sight of her forced smile and her trembling hands. He had warned her about Ramiz, had seen through the charm and the wealth, but Alina had been trapped by family pressure, by fear, by the hope that maybe she could change him. Samuel's presence here tonight wasn't just for ceremony, it was a silent vow. He would protect her no matter the cost. The ceremony began, Samuel's deep voice filling the cathedral with scripture and solemnity. Yet beneath the holy words an unspoken tension rippled. Every glance between bride and groom carried unvoiced truths. Every murmur from the pews hinted at secrets just beneath the surface. And though Ramiz smirked as if he were untouchable, there was one thing he did not know, that the man standing in priestly robes had been waiting for this very moment. The chandeliers sparkled, the choir sang softly, and the guests leaned forward with eager anticipation. It looked like the perfect wedding, yet beneath the surface, the stage was being set for betrayal, revelation, and justice. And as Alina stood beside her husband, her forced smile faltering for the briefest second, she whispered a prayer in her heart, not for love, not for happiness, but for strength. The dazzling chandeliers, the polished marble, and the hushed reverence of the wedding crowd were only a thin veil over the truth, one that Alina carried heavily in her heart. As she stood beside Ramiz, her smile anchored in place, her mind wandered back through the shadows of their marriage, to the nights that had nearly broken her. Ramiz had not always been this cruel, or perhaps he had and she had chosen not to see it. In the beginning he was charismatic, intoxicating, the kind of man who could fill a room with his presence. He courted her with roses, whispered promises of a life of security and grandeur. For a while, she believed him, but beneath the glimmer, there were cracks. Sharp words slipped between compliments, subtle control masked as concern. At first, she told herself it was stress, the burden of running a corporation. But soon, his temper revealed its true form. Nights became battlegrounds. He berated her for her simplicity, mocked her for not fitting into his glamorous world. "You're too plain, Alina," he would sneer. "Do you know how lucky you are that I chose you?" The words cut deeper than any slap could. He ignored her presence at parties, flaunted his charm before other women, and yet, when they were alone, accused her of being ungrateful. The pregnancy had not been planned. She still remembered the day she told him, the trembling of her hands as she held the test. For a moment, she had foolishly hoped he might soften, that fatherhood would anchor him, make him see her differently. Instead, his expression turned cold, his jaw clenched like a man facing a business setback. "A child," he hissed. "Do you have any idea what this means for me right now? The investors, my image. I don't need this burden." That word, burden, it echoed in her heart long after. To him, the child was not a blessing, not a piece of their love, but a chain, an inconvenience. And then there was Maya, the other woman. the glamorous, ruthless mistress who had carved her way into Ramiz's life and heart with sharp edges and sweet poison. Alina had seen the messages, had caught the faint scent of unfamiliar perfume on his suits. Maya was everything Ramiz admired, bold, unapologetic, dazzling in ways Alina never wished to be. He never tried to hide the affair, not really. Sometimes he even flaunted it, daring her to speak, to protest. There was one night Alina nearly left. She had packed a small bag, her hands trembling, tears streaking her face as she stared at the door. Ramiz had come home late, reeking of alcohol and Maya's perfume. When she confronted him, he laughed, actually laughed. "You leave me," he scoffed. "Go ahead, Alina, but remember, without me you are nothing, just another forgotten face." She had stood there for hours, clutching the bag, staring at the threshold of freedom. But when the dawn came, she unpacked it. Not because she forgave him, but because of her family's honor. Because of the unyielding voice of tradition whispering that a woman does not walk away. She told herself she could endure, that perhaps things would change once the baby arrived. But deep inside, she knew she was lying to herself. Father Samuel had long suspected something was wrong. He would notice the faint bruises she covered with makeup, the dimness in her once bright eyes. He asked gently, never pressing too hard. But Alina always brushed it aside with the same answer, "I'm fine, brother, truly." Yet Samuel was no fool. He knew the language of silence, the weight of words left unsaid. He sensed the darkness surrounding his sister, even if she never gave him proof. Now, standing in the grand cathedral, Alina's thoughts raced between the past and present. The guests around her saw wealth, beauty, and power. But she knew better. Beneath the surface lay scars invisible to the world, scars carved by words, neglect, betrayal, and cruelty. And though Ramiz stood tall at the altar, smiling his perfect smile, Alina's heart whispered a truth she could no longer ignore. This was not love, this was survival. The cathedral was hushed, the kind of silence that carried weight. Every breath, every whisper, seemed suspended as Father Samuel's voice echoed through the arches, guiding the sacred vows. Alina's hands trembled slightly in Ramiz's grip, her heart pounding against her ribs as though trying to break free. The words to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, felt heavy on her tongue. She hesitated. It was just a fraction of a second, the kind of pause only a keen observer might notice. But in that brief silence, Alina felt the sharpness of Ramiz's gaze drilling into her. His grip on her fingers tightened, his nails digging into her skin, a warning, a command, to obey. The hesitation was enough. A murmur rippled through the guests. Cameras adjusted, lenses zoomed in, eager to capture even the faintest crack in the picture-perfect image of the power couple. And then it happened. Without warning, without restraint, Ramiz's hand lashed out and struck her across the face. The sound echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot. Gasps erupted from the pews, sharp and disbelieving. A woman stifled a scream. A man muttered in outrage. Guests rose to their feet in shock, some clutching their pearls, others frozen in horror. The choir faltered mid-hymn, their voices dropping. Into stunned silence, Alina staggered under the force of the blow, her veil shifting, her cheek reddening instantly. For a moment, the world blurred, her ears ringing. She reached instinctively for her belly, as though to shield the unborn child from the violence that had finally spilled into public view. Ramiz, breathing heavily, sneered at her, his voice carrying across the hall. "You thought you could trap me with a child? You think I don't see what you're doing?" His words cut sharper than the slap. They carried accusation, disdain, and humiliation, and he had chosen to throw them like daggers in front of hundreds of witnesses. The cathedral erupted into chaos. Guests began whispering fiercely, some pulling out their phones to capture the scandal, others exchanging outraged glances. Flash after flash of cameras lit the air, the scandal immortalized in pixels that would no doubt flood social media before the hour was done. But amid the chaos, one figure remained composed. Father Samuel stood steady at the altar, his Bible still in hand. His eyes, however, were ablaze, the calm priestly facade barely holding back the fury of an elder brother watching his sister struck in the holiest of places. His jaw clenched, and though he spoke no words yet, his silence roared louder than the whispers around them. Alina's hand pressed to her cheek, the sting of his palm still fresh. Her eyes watered, but not from weakness, not this time. She looked at Ramiz, really looked at him, and in her gaze was not submission, not defeat, but quiet defiance. For years, she had endured in silence, bowing under his cruelty, hiding behind fragile excuses. But this moment, this public act of violence stripped everything bare. The mask had fallen, and the world had finally seen the man he truly was. Her lips quivered, not with fear, but with something that unsettled Ramiz more than her silence ever had. Resolve. The guests began to murmur louder, some openly criticizing, others recording still. How could he in God's house? She's pregnant. The tide was turning. Sympathy surging toward Alina while disgust clouded the once vivid image of the CEO. Ramiz, realizing what he had done, tried to salvage the moment. He raised his hands in mock frustration, pacing slightly as if he were the victim of provocation. "You don't understand," he barked at the murmuring crowd. She's been manipulating me. using this child, but his words drowned in the rising tide of whispers. In the furious silence of Samuel, in the unyielding gaze of the woman he had just struck, for the first time in years Alina felt something new stir within her. Not fear, not despair, but strength born out of humiliation, out of pain, out of a truth finally dragged into the light. She lowered her hand from her cheek, lifted her chin ever so slightly, and met Ramiz's eyes. The quiet defiance in her gaze pierced him deeper than any scream could. And though he did not know it yet, this moment was not just a scandal, it was the beginning of his downfall. The hush that followed, Ramiz's outburst, was suffocating. The cathedral, once filled with music and whispers of admiration, now trembled with the weight of scandal. Alina stood motionless, her cheeks still flushed from the slap, her eyes locked on her husband with unwavering defiance. And then, it was Samuel who broke the silence. He closed the Bible in his hands slowly, the sound of its cover snapping shut, echoing like a gavel in a courtroom. His calm demeanor, the mask of priestly composure, began to fall away. His voice, when it came, was steady but sharp, every word carved with righteous fury. "You just assaulted your wife in God's house." His piercing eyes fixed on Ramiz unblinking. Then, leaning forward ever so slightly, he delivered the blow that sent a ripple of shock through the cathedral and in front of her brother. The words crashed through the hall like thunder. Gasps erupted among the guests. Some clutched their pearls, others dropped their programs, and more than a few exchanged frantic whispers. Cameras clicked wildly, trying to capture not only the scandal of the slap but the earth-shattering revelation that followed. Ramiz's face drained of color, his lips parted in disbelief, his composure faltering for the first time in years. He stared at Samuel as though seeing him for the first time, the priest's calm authority now replaced with something more dangerous, something calculated. "You, her brother," he stammered, his arrogance cracking. Samuel's expression didn't waver. "Her elder brother. And more than that, a lawyer who has been watching you, listening, preparing." The murmurs swelled into chaos. Guests who had once bowed to Ramiz's wealth now turned curious, even hostile. The CEO's carefully cultivated image of power was unraveling thread by thread before the people he sought most to impress. Alina, still holding her ground beside him, felt a strange strength course through her veins. For the first time, she was not alone. This moment wasn't fate, wasn't chance, it was deliberate. She looked at Samuel and then back at Ramiz. Her silence was no longer weakness, it was strategy. This was her plan. Every humiliation, every cruel word, every night she had suffered in silence, all of it had led to this stage, this cathedral, this reckoning. Ramiz thought he had trapped her, but she had been the one setting the trap. And now the jaws were closing. Samuel stepped closer, his voice ringing with authority. "This marriage, this ceremony, you thought it would be your victory lap. But tonight, in front of God and everyone you sought to impress, you revealed your true face, and now, you will answer for it." Ramiz's hands clenched into fists, but his eyes flickered with something he had never shown before, fear. For the first time, he was not in control. The guests leaned in, waiting for what would unfold next. Some already whispered about the media storm, others about legal consequences. But one thing was clear, the narrative had shifted. No longer was this a story of a powerful CEO and his modest wife. This was a story of betrayal exposed, of a priest unmasking himself as a brother and a lawyer, of a woman reclaiming her strength. And as Alina lifted her chin, the light catching her tear-streaked face, she no longer looked like a victim. It looked like a woman who had been waiting for this very moment. The cathedral was already a battlefield of whispers, gasps, and flashing cameras when the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Heads turned, and the atmosphere thickened with dread. The sound of heels clicking against the marble floor echoed like a drumbeat, drawing every eye toward the entrance. Maya. She arrived, not quietly, not with shame, but with the confidence of a queen entering her court. Draped in a scarlet dress that clung to her figure like molten fire, she oozed defiance. Her lips curved into a smirk as she surveyed the chaos, her gaze lingering on Alina, pale, shaken, yet standing firm beside Samuel. "Well, isn't this poetic?" Maya's voice carried across the hall, smooth and venomous. The great CEO, reduced to a fool by his plain little wife. "I almost pity you, Alina, almost." Gasps swept through the crowd again, the scandal multiplying. It was one thing to see the CEO slap his pregnant wife. It was another to witness his mistress storm into the wedding with boldness that bordered on cruelty. Alina's heart pounded, but she held her ground. She would not give Maya the satisfaction of breaking. Maya approached the altar, her heels clicking defiantly, and leaned in close enough for her words to pierce Alina like knives. "You've always been weak, pathetic, hiding behind family honor, clinging to scraps of attention he threw at you. Did you really think you mattered? Did you really think carrying his child would keep him?" The cruelty of the words stung, but this time Alina didn't flinch. She simply looked back, her silence heavier than any retort. Ramiz shifted uncomfortably, sweat beading at his temple. The presence of both women, his wife and his mistress, combined with Samuel's revelation, had dismantled the fortress of control he thought indestructible. Samuel, however, remained perfectly calm. His eyes never left Maya as he slowly reached into his vestments and pulled out a small notepad. With measured precision, he began to jot down her words. "Go on," he said smoothly, his voice steady as a judge. "Please, continue. Every word you speak is another piece of testimony, and I assure you, I'm recording all of it." Maya's smirk faltered for the first time, a flicker of unease passing across her face. From the back of the cathedral, two sharply dressed individuals began to move closer. They weren't guests. They were Samuel's legal associates, waiting quietly until signaled. At a subtle nod from him, they spread into the crowd, collecting murmurs, statements, even snippets of video evidence already circulating from guests' phones. The power dynamic shifted palpably. What had started as humiliation for Alina was becoming an inquisition against Ramiz and Maya. The guests, once enthralled by Ramiz's wealth and charisma, now began to murmur their disgust. "She's pregnant, and he slapped her. Unbelievable. And that woman, walking in here like this, poor girl. She's stronger than I imagined." Sympathy spread like wildfire. For the first time in years, Alina was not the shadow in Ramiz's story. She was the light drawing people's loyalty. Maya, realizing too late the crowd's shifting opinion, tried to regain control. She tossed her hair back, scoffing. "What? You all pity her now? Don't be fooled. She's no saint. She's manipulative, desperate." But her words rang hollow against the collective disapproval. Faces once eager to impress her now looked away with disdain. Phones that once recorded her glamour now caught her venom, her cruelty. Alina felt a flicker of hope spark in her chest. For years her truth had been hidden, smothered by Ramiz's power and Maya's venom. But now, in this sacred space, surrounded by witnesses, the tide was turning. And as Samuel closed his notepad, his gaze hard as steel, Alina realized this was only the beginning of their downfall. The cathedral was no longer a place of worship, but a stage for confrontation. The guests, once restless, now sat transfixed, as if watching a trial unfold. And in many ways, that was exactly what it had become. Father Samuel closed his Bible, stepped forward, and fixed his piercing gaze on Ramiz. His voice, calm but commanding, carried to every corner of the vast hall. "Ramiz Khan," he said, using the full weight of his tone, "you stand here in God's house, having humiliated and assaulted your wife before witnesses. Do you deny it?" Ramiz let out a scoff, straightening his jacket with theatrical arrogance. "Deny it? Why should I? Everyone saw it." She hesitated. "She embarrassed me. I don't tolerate disobedience, not in business and not in my personal life." A collective gasp spread through the audience. His arrogance was staggering, his lack of remorse chilling. But Ramiz, blinded by pride, mistook shock for admiration. "You people don't understand," he continued, his voice swelling with self-importance. "I built an empire with my own hands. I am the face of Khan looks, the man whose name opens doors in every boardroom. This wedding, this marriage, is nothing more than a formality to silence critics, to preserve appearances. Do you think I would let some fragile woman ruin everything I've worked for?" His words dripped with disdain, his voice echoing through the cathedral like a confession he didn't realize he was making. Samuel did not move, did not blink. He simply gestured toward the crowd. "You heard him. He admits it openly. This marriage was never about love, never about family, but about image and power." The murmurs grew louder, the crowd shifting in their seats. What had once been admiration for the powerful CEO was curdling into disgust. And then Samuel struck again. This time with precision. "Tell me, Ramiz, is it true that you plan to divorce Alina after finalizing your latest business deals?" For the first time, Ramiz faltered, his eyes narrowed. "What nonsense!" But before he could finish, a man rose from the crowd, one of Ramiz's former associates. "It's true," he said, voice steady. "I was in the room when you told Maya that Alina was nothing but a placeholder, pawn, until the contracts were signed." Gasps erupted again. More voices followed. Another guest, a former employee, nodded. "He said it in front of us too, that once the investors came through, he'd be free of her." The walls of arrogance around Ramiz began to crumble. He turned sharply to Maya, his mistress, but she avoided his gaze, suddenly less defiant than before. Samuel's eyes gleamed, the fire of justice burning within them. "So you see," he said, his voice rising with conviction, "this man never intended to honor his vows. He sought to use my sister as a shield, a prop to protect his empire, and when he was finished, he planned to discard her." Alina stood silently beside Samuel, her head held high. The humiliation she had endured was being transformed into vindication. Every cruel truth dragged into the light, and as the crowd murmured louder, the truth solidifying in their minds, Alina's thoughts drifted back to a quiet night weeks earlier. A night when Samuel had sat with her in his study, the lamplight casting shadows on his worn desk. "Alina," he had said gently, his hand over hers, "you have suffered long enough. This time, we fight back. Not in silence, not in shadows, but in front of the world. Let him reveal who he truly is, and when he does, we'll be ready." She had nodded then, hesitant but hopeful. And now, standing in the cathedral with hundreds of witnesses watching her husband unravel, she realized Samuel had been right. This was no longer her humiliation, it was his undoing. The cathedral was thick with tension, the weight of Ramiz's arrogance still echoing in the vaulted ceilings. The crowd murmured like restless waves, but Alina's silence commanded more power than the noise. Her eyes, steady and unblinking, shifted from her husband's sneering face to the sea of witnesses who had gathered to bless a marriage, and instead had been shown its ruin. She reached into the folds of her embroidered dupatta and pulled out a small device, a sleek digital recorder. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the electricity of the moment. For years, she had been forced into silence, enduring the sting of insults, the sting of blows, the sting of neglect, but silence had been her strategy, not her weakness. Now that silence was ready to roar, her voice, soft but firm, carried across. The whole you think no one knows the truth, Ramiz, but I've carried the truth with me waiting for this day. The device crackled to life, and then his voice filled the cathedral. I'll get rid of her after the deal closes. Maya, you'll be the one beside me when I announce the merger. Alina is nothing, just a womb carrying a mistake. A collective gasp surged through the guests. The words, Ramiz's own voice, struck harder than any slap. Faces turned, eyes darted, whispers transformed into outrage. The recording continued. Another clip, Ramiz laughing coldly. She cries too much. I told you, Maya, I don't care. If she breaks, let her. The weaker she looks, the easier it is to paint her as unstable when I divorce her. The venom in his tone was undeniable. Each word was a dagger to Alina's chest, but she stood tall, her chin lifted in defiance. Maya, standing near the altar in her glittering gown, paled. Her smirk faltered. The evidence implicated her too, her own voice slipping through the speakers. Don't worry, once she's gone, I'll make sure your investors see you as the strong, successful man they need. No one will question it. The crowd erupted. Shock turned to fury. A woman in the front row whispered, God help her, she's been suffering all this time. Another man muttered, and he played the perfect husband in public. Cameras clicked like gunfire, capturing every angle of the scandal unraveling in real time. Samuel's expression remained steady, but in his eyes burned a fierce pride. He had always suspected his sister's pain ran deeper than she let on, and now she had laid it bare with unshakable courage. Ramiz lunged forward, his face red with rage. You planned this, you conniving. But Alina raised her hand, silencing him. Her voice was no longer trembling, it was unbreakable steel. No, Ramiz, you planned this. You planned to destroy me, to strip me of dignity, to erase me, when I no longer served your purpose. But today, everyone sees the truth. Today, your empire of lies collapses. Her palm, still faintly flushed from the slap he had given her moments earlier, hovered near her cheek. That single act of violence, the public humiliation meant to reduce her to nothing. That had become the ultimate symbol. It was proof of years of abuse condensed into one unforgettable moment. It was the spark that lit her rebellion. She looked out at the witnesses, her voice clear. That slap was not the first, but it will be the last. I am not his victim anymore. Applause broke out, tentative at first, then swelling as the guests realized the magnitude of her bravery. Some rose to their feet, others shouted words of encouragement. The tide had turned, the shame was no longer hers to carry. Ramiz cornered, sputtered, his words drowned out by the chorus of support for the woman he had underestimated. Maya shrank back, exposed as a willing accomplice. Alina stood tall, the recorder still in her hand, her eyes blazing with newfound strength. For the first time in years, her voice was free and it was unstoppable. The cathedral had transformed from a place of vows into a stage of reckoning. The crowd that had come, expecting a wedding feast, now found themselves witnesses to a trial. Every word, every revelation had stacked higher against Ramiz, but what came next would leave him no escape. Samuel, who had been calm and deliberate throughout, now stepped forward. His clerical robe swayed slightly as he raised a hand, calling for silence. His voice was steady but carried the weight of thunder. Ramiz, he said, his gaze unflinching. You believed this day was your stage, your triumph, but it was always your downfall. Before you ever laid a hand on my sister today, before you ever threatened her dignity, the law was already waiting. The guests leaned forward, hanging on every word. Cameras flashed, capturing his declaration. Samuel turned to the doors of the cathedral and gestured. Officers. The heavy oak doors creaked open, and two uniformed police officers strode inside, followed by plainclothes investigators. Gasps rippled across the hall. The murmurs grew into a low roar as realization dawned. This wasn't merely a confrontation, it was a meticulously laid trap. Ramiz staggered back, his face blanching. What is this? His arrogance faltered for the first time, his voice trembling beneath the weight of fear. Samuel's voice sharpened like a blade. What this is, Ramiz, is justice. I filed proceedings against you weeks ago for domestic abuse, fraud, and conspiracy. Today, with hundreds of witnesses present, your crimes have been sealed in the light of truth. No more shadows, no more lies. An officer unfolded a document and began to read aloud. Charges: domestic violence, emotional and physical abuse, fraud in financial dealings with investors, conspiracy to defraud, and public assault in front of multiple witnesses. The words reverberated through the hall like a death knell. Ramiz tried to speak, but his mouth opened and closed without sound. The very empire of confidence he had built around himself was crumbling. Alina stood still, watching her heart hammering, but her spine straight as steel. This was no longer just her fight. It had become a collective witness to truth. As the officers approached, Ramiz erupted, his rage returning in desperate bursts. "You can't arrest me here. I am the investor, the provider. I control this city." But the officers didn't flinch. One clasped handcuffs around his wrists with an audible click that echoed in the cathedral. The sound was final. The guests, once divided, now murmured in unison, some with pity for Alina, others with disdain for the fallen man who had played them all. But before the tension could settle, another shrill voice cut through the air. Maya, she had been lingering near the back, her glittering gown now seeming grotesque under the light of exposure, her face twisted with panic. "This is madness. He's innocent. This is a trap." She turned on her heel, attempting to bolt toward the side exit, but Samuel had anticipated her. Two members of his legal team, positioned discreetly by the doors, moved swiftly, blocking her escape. Samuel's voice followed her like a shadow. "Maya Khan, you are charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, aiding and abetting abuse, and obstruction of justice." The blood drained from her face. No, you can't." But one of the plainclothes investigators stepped forward, producing documents and evidence bags. "We have recordings, Ms. Khan. Your voice conspiring with Mr. Ramiz. You'll have your chance to speak in court." The crowd gasped again, but this time with grim satisfaction. The predators had been cornered. Maya's defiance crumbled into shrieking denial, but it was no use. She was escorted to the side, flanked by officers, her eyes darting wildly, searching for someone to save her. No one moved. The guests who once might have envied her beauty and boldness now only saw disgrace. Ramiz, handcuffed, glared at Alina with burning hatred. "You'll regret this," he hissed, though his voice cracked with fear. But Alina did not flinch. Her lips curved into the faintest, calmest smile, the smile of a woman who had already endured the worst and survived. Samuel placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "No, Ramiz, the only one who will regret is you." The cathedral doors closed behind the arrested pair, their downfall echoing long after their footsteps faded. For the first time in years, Alina felt the air fill her lungs without heaviness. The trap had sprung, and she had won. Weeks later, the cathedral scandal had transformed into the nation's most talked about trial. Headlines screamed of betrayal, abuse, and power brought to its knees. Crowds gathered outside the grand courthouse, each day, their voices buzzing like a hive of judgment. Reporters jostled for space, cameras flashing as the black sedan carrying Alina pulled up to the entrance. She stepped out slowly, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. Time had passed since the disastrous wedding day, and her pregnancy was now unmistakable. Yet she carried herself with a quiet strength, her chin raised, her step steady. The same woman who had once been silenced by shame now walked into court, as a symbol of resilience stood inside. The courtroom brimmed with tension. Ramiz sat at the defendant's table, his once impeccable suit wrinkled, his arrogance dimmed but not extinguished. Maya, beside him, tried to avoid the cameras, but her face betrayed panic every time a flash caught her. Both looked like ghosts of the glamorous figures they once paraded as Alina was sworn in, and silence fell as she took the stand. She clasped her hands in her lap, her fingers trembling only slightly. Then, when her eyes met Samuel's across the room, a calm washed over her. "Mrs. Alina." The judge began, "You may testify." Her voice, though soft, carried across the chamber. "For years I lived in fear. I was mocked, gaslighted, and abused by the man I called my husband. He told me I was worthless, that I was weak. He paraded his mistress in front of me, humiliating me. But today I speak not as his victim but as someone who survived him." A hush fell across the audience. Some dabbed at their eyes. Others leaned forward, hanging on her words. She detailed the nights of bruises hidden under long sleeves, the cruel whispers meant to break her spirit, the financial manipulation that tied her down. Each word cut deeper than the last, painting a picture of cruelty too sharp to ignore. When Samuel rose to cross-examine Ramiz, the atmosphere shifted. The prosecutor in him burned bright, precise, and relentless. "Mr. Ramiz," Samuel began, his tone razor-sharp, "you've maintained that your marriage was happy, is that correct?" Ramiz smirked faintly, trying to summon his old charm. "Of course. My wife is exaggerating. She's emotional. You know how women are." Gasps echoed through the room. Samuel seized the moment. "Exaggerating? Then perhaps you'd like to explain why we have recordings of you and Miss Maya plotting her downfall, or witnesses who overheard you boasting about discarding her once your business deals were secured." The defense faltered. Ramiz shifted, uncomfortably, his mask cracking, and Ms. Maya. Samuel turned. "You've testified under oath that you were uninvolved in any conspiracy, yet your voice is clearly heard in these recordings. laughing at Alina's suffering. "Would you like to explain to the jury why your innocence sounds exactly like malice?" Maya's face drained of color. She stammered, but no coherent defense formed piece by piece. Samuel dismantled their lies, weaving evidence and testimony into an unbreakable net. The jury's expressions hardened with every revelation, their sympathy clearly shifting toward Alina. Outside, the media storm raged, branding Alina a hero. Headlines declared, "Pregnant wife stands tall in courtroom showdown and abuse. Exposed. The fall of a tyrant." Finally, after days of testimony, the jury filed back into the courtroom. The four persons stood, their voice steady, on all counts guilty. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. "Ramiz Ahmed, you are hereby sentenced to 15 years in prison for domestic abuse, fraud, and assault. Alina Khan, you are convicted of conspiracy and sentenced to 5 years. Ramiz's head fell into his hands, his arrogance shattered. Maya wept openly, her mascara streaking down her face, her beauty now a hollow mask. Alina exhaled slowly, her hand instinctively caressing her belly. The child she carried would never know life under a tyrant's shadow, as Samuel placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. The courtroom erupted, some applauding, others simply watching with awe. Alina had not just won her freedom, she had become the living embodiment of survival. Months had passed since the trial that shook the city. The seasons had shifted, the media frenzy had begun to fade, but for Alina, life was only beginning to bloom again. The cries of a newborn echoed softly in the hospital room, filling the air with the sweetest music she had ever heard. Alina cradled her daughter, her eyes brimming with tears that were no longer born of sorrow but of gratitude. The tiny fingers curled instinctively around her thumb, fragile yet unyielding, a reminder that even in brokenness, new life could emerge. "She's perfect," Samuel whispered, leaning over to brush a stray curl from Alina's forehead. His voice carried a gentleness she had come to rely on, a contrast to the cruelty she once endured. "She's strong," Alina corrected, with a soft smile. "Stronger than me. She survived everything before she even took her first breath." The baby stirred and settled again, and Alina pressed a kiss against her daughter's warm forehead. In that moment, all the scars visible and invisible seemed to fade. She was no longer defined by the hands that hurt her, but by the new life she now held in her arms. Weeks later, Alina and Samuel stood together at the launch of their foundation. The banner behind them read, "House of Dawn, a safe haven for women." Reporters filled the room, but the atmosphere was not one of scandal, it was of hope. Alina, dressed in an elegant but simple white dress, took the stage with her baby, nestled in her arms. Cameras flashed, but this time the light felt like a blessing rather than a weapon. "When I stood in court months ago, I was fighting for my life," she began, her voice steady. "Today, I stand for every woman who thought she was alone, every woman who thought silence was her only choice. House of Dawn will be a refuge, a place where survival becomes strength, where wounds become wisdom, and where no woman ever has to feel powerless again." Applause rose, not in scandal but in solidarity. Samuel stepped beside her, his hand resting reassuringly at her back. Together they represented not just justice, but a second chance, proof that broken lives could be rebuilt. Later that afternoon, after the speeches, Alina found herself once again standing on the courthouse steps. This time the air felt lighter, the weight of the past no longer dragging her down. The courthouse doors opened behind her, and Samuel emerged at her side. Alina adjusted her baby in her arms, the child's tiny eyes blinking curiously at the world she had just entered. For a moment, Alina simply stood there, gazing at the horizon, where sunlight spilled like molten gold across the city skyline. She whispered softly, almost like a vow, "This is our dawn." As Samuel slipped his hand into hers, the cameras clicked, immortalizing the image of a woman who had been silenced, beaten, and betrayed, now walking forward with unshakable strength, and as if carried by the wind itself, her voice lingered in the air like the closing lines of a story. "They thought I was powerless, but blood ties and truth made me stronger than ever." Alina walked forward, her baby close to her heart, Samuel by her side, and a house of dawn waiting to shelter countless others who would one day rise, just as she had.